Welcome back. A new literacy program for public schools is coming to NYC following the aftermath of remote schooling. The program comes in response to a major drop in reading scores during the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining me to discuss the new program is the CEO of Teaching Matters, Lynette Guastaferro. Lynette, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, could you first just talk about your organization, Teaching Matters?
Sure. So Teaching Matters is a nonprofit education organization. It was founded with the mission that every child should have equitable access to really high quality teaching, no matter their zip code. So how we do this is we have a group of close to 80 coaches, mentors that work side by side with teachers, principals in schools, helping them to implement and in effect their instruction. We measure our success based on movements in kids' math outcomes and their reading outcomes, and we have research to show that we have made that impact.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about the impact that you've had on New York City schools. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so over 30 years, we've worked in close to 1,000 of the New York City schools. So it's a long history. And we've had a direct impact on student outcomes, which I think is really important. Like, we want our kids to be able to be, numerate and literate, and that's really how we measure our work. The other piece that we have done, which I think has been really important after COVID, is teachers have been through a lot. And the mentoring, the support, I think has been a lifeline, especially since COVID. And I'm really proud of that.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think, for me at least, when I'm thinking about like your organization, I think like there's a focus on students, which is great. But I like to hear that there's a focus on teachers.
Oh,
can you just expand on that a little bit more, and like the support that you give teachers?
Yeah. So when we're partnering with a school, we'll have a coach who is an expert in their own right and has moved, literacy outcomes for their students and has maybe led a group of literacy teachers in their own school. So when they come to a school, they are modeling for the teacher. They're observing the teacher, giving them feedback. They are having conversations where the teacher's saying, I don't know why this isn't working, and they're able to talk it through. So, I think teaching's really hard because it's so important. Your kids are so important to you, and you have a lot of self-doubt. Everybody does. And so when you have someone who is really able to help you process what's working and not working, it's a real emotional support to teachers, and it really keeps them in the profession. The research shows that this kind of coaching keeps teachers teaching longer, and that's what our Bronx kids need.
Now, I really want to talk about the new literacy program, or as I understand, is more of an initiative that's happening in New York City. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. NYC Reads, NYC Reads is frankly a historic change in the way that the city is making a promise to families that the decision around the curriculum that your kids will be engaged in is now being made at the superintendent and the central level. So the mayor is able to say, I guarantee you a research-based curriculum. In the past, the decision's been at the school level, and it's been like that for a long time. Now, why does this matter to families? I think it's really important because when you have a district where every teacher and every principal is working around a common playbook, there's all these other things that you can now do, right? So you can provide professional learning that's really aligned. Everybody's on the same page. Teachers across schools can observe what's working, and then they go back to their own school and it's the exact same curriculum, so they can really transfer what they've learned. You can start to look at assessments differently and make sure the assessments really measure what the kids learned in the classroom. And so it's really transformative. People have talked about this as, we're going to have phonics now. And I was like, well, frankly, phonics has been in place for in many, many schools. I think it's more important than that. And I think phonics is really important, don't get me wrong. But I think it's about changing the infrastructure for the city so that we can guarantee every family a research-based curriculum. You don't have to worry anymore. You will know that it's been approved.
Now, I understand that there's 3 models, and you can correct me on that.
Yeah.
There's 3 models. Can you just explain like what they are and like what the kids could be learning?
So there's 3 choices of curricula right now that the districts are allowed to use for K-5, and that's just the first start. And in fact, I think there's a choice of 2 different phonics programs as well. The different curricula, I really like to say, like, what's similar about the curricula? They've all met a certain standard. They all provide kind of a research-based approach to reading. And there's some differences, but I think what's more important here is that every teacher in the district's going to be using the same curricula. So, we say curriculum does not uh, what really makes a difference for kids is a group of teachers that are really working together and rowing the boat, together. And so when you have a common curricula, that makes that more possible. Having a common curriculum on its own is not a solution. It's about the teachers, and it's about how the teachers collaborate and work together that really, really makes a difference for schools.
Now, I want to talk about basically how this is a response to the drop in reading scores following COVID.
Yeah.
Now, I know like when remote schooling was happening, a lot of people had these concerns. Can you just talk about what you've noticed and just expand on, how reading scores were
Yeah.
back then and then, what we saw during COVID?
So, nationally, McKinsey's done some research to show that across the board, kids have lost about a half a year of reading. But we know that loss, that's an average. And so, for younger children, it's particularly difficult. For lower socioeconomic communities, they were hit much harder. Kids whose parents were essential workers and weren't sitting, at home, working from home. But so there's all sorts of reasons why that half a year is spread out pretty differently. I think that what the mayor is doing is to address to some degree, like this situation we're in, especially for younger children, around ensuring that they can read. But I think without COVID, this was something that we needed to do.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more, just focus on like the actual like reading part, but it's not just reading, it's also like the pronunciation of words, I guess like how they understand. Can you just explain like why that's so important?
Yeah, so one of the things that we sort of for a number of years was not practiced effectively across schools was this understanding that children need a systematic approach to phonics. Now, I'm old, so I had that. And in fact, I went to kindergarten in the Bronx and was struggling to read and went through a year of phonics intensive. So we were doing it, right? We just, for some reason, the education field moved away. I think there was a sense that kids were not stimulated by it. It was like not engaging. We wanted to move to a love of reading. We definitely want kids to love reading, but we, from brain science know that kids have to systematically understand the code. Like phonics is a code. And kids have to know how to master that so that they can read for understanding. And by the way, it's true, not every child needs phonics. It's around 1 in 3 that really, really need it. And I was one of them. I couldn't read a thing until I went through phonics. And then all of a sudden the world opened up and I could write 2-page papers. So like, it really is just a code. It's not a sign of intelligence. It's a code. And some kids need the code more than others.
Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. You also kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, that children from maybe lower income areas struggle a little bit more. Black and Latino students tend to struggle a little bit more as well. Can you just explain, why we're seeing that and like what could be the reasons for that?
Well, I mean, we know that we have a long history of sort of systemic oppression in our education system that we don't have enough time on this show to cover. And that's still going on. I mean, we still have a system of schools that are funded by property taxes, which means that, the wealthier communities you live in, the more funding your schools get. So we don't have an equal education system. And to this day, we have major, major, major differences in our schools because of how the school system is funded. It's a travesty. It's wrong, and it really needs to be changed. So I think that's an important sort of history that you have to take in context with that. With respect to, students are also coming in, they speak a second language. The research shows that actually many of those children catch up and start beating the rest of the kids from a test score perspective. So, I don't consider that to be, that's a language issue where kids are sort of having to get the language before they can, they can get to the next level.
Now we have a few minutes left, and I really want to touch on what Mayor Adams said. His administration believes that if you don't educate, you incarcerate, and says that the current literacy program leaves too many kids behind. What have you seen in your experience? And is this something that you necessarily agree with or maybe possibly find not to be the case?
I really appreciate the mayor and his breadth of experience and his just breaking it down the way he has. Yes, if kids can't read, there is a correlation to what. So in the jail system, research shows that 70% of folks who are incarcerated are reading at 4th grade and below reading level. So you do the math. He's talking about sort of let's handle the problems upstream so that we don't have to deal with these issues downstream. If we could make sure that all of our kids were reading at a high level, their whole trajectory of school and lifetime outcomes change. And yes, some of those outliers can show that it can increase, it can cause kids to have life situations that lead to incarceration. So I love the fact that the mayor was he's focused on education. He's worked in policing, and he's taking a practical approach and taking a long view on this.
Now, quickly, can you just let us know what you hope to see? I guess since the mayor is looking at what could happen in the future, what do you hope to see of the future of like reading and education in New York City?
So what I really hope to see in like the next 5 years is that everyone in this ecosystem, whether you're nonprofits helping educators, whether you're the union that has, a whole bunch of ways to support teachers, the teachers themselves, the teacher leaders, they were all talking the same language, and we're able to learn from each other, and we're able to really figure out how to get better and better and better over time. So like first thing we have to learn these new curricula, but then it's how do we continuously improve? These curriculum are not going to work for every student. Teachers have a lot of work to do on top of this to make sure it works for every child. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to get better and better at figuring that out over time. So I am excited to be on a common playing field where we can work together with a similar playbook and really work together for the first time in many, many years.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing this information.
Thank you so much for having me.
To stay in touch with Teaching Matters, you can go to www.teachingmatters.org or follow them on social media at Teaching Matters. Stay tuned. We have more open for you right after this.